My guest today is an amazing singer-songwriter and the man behind the group The Deer Hunter. I'd like to welcome Casey Crescenzo. Nice to meet you, finally.
Thank you very much.
A big fan. I got to say that I'm a bit new to the Deer Hunter party. And I say that both as a bad and a good thing. Bad in that how did this happen? That I didn't know about the band for ever until the last couple of years, and good, which is that I have had the pleasure of just going back and getting all the albums, almost like Netflix binging. So that's been awesome.
Yeah.
And
Well, I can definitely answer why for number one. I could tell you why you haven't heard of us. And it's mostly just because I think we're a band that from the beginning was unfortunately defaulting to the wrong sort of form of promotion and marketing, and the world that we got lumped in. It kind of put us in this really weird spot, and it's not like I've had a hard life or anything like that, but it put us in a weird spot where the realm we were being marketed in wasn't necessarily going to, outreach to the kinds of listeners who would like this kind of band. But at the same time, that other world of listeners who wasn't necessarily being marketed to, the association we had with from the beginning with like emo and post-hardcore and stuff like that, that turned off a lot of people who might have liked the band if there wasn't that association. So it's this weird, weird sort of middle ground purgatory of music that we've sort of lived in. And also, we've never been on a bigger label, and anyone who is just going to throw money at the band to get it into people's ears. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, that's totally a thing. And in getting to know the band's music and what you guys do and what you're able to write and produce, I'm not sure there's an easy genre. That's what's become apparent to me. And, being that the website's called the Prog Report, and we, report on all the latest Dream Theater and Steven Wilson news and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that I see you guys as a prog band either. I'm not sure what to make of it, but what I do know is, because you take so many risks musically, and the musicianship is great, and it's adventurous and it's creative, it totally falls into the prog vein, and we're more than happy to have the association with your band. I think that's where you're winning over a lot of these fans.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would say, For me, for a few years when we would get that association, or we would be called Prog, I think we started getting that banner maybe 3 records in. And I think it's actually a really good thing in the sense that I think that Prog for the longest time was, like, I would consider Frank Zappa Prog.
Sure.
Even though there's so many of his songs are, surreally simple and sort of pop formulaic. Not all of it, but obviously there's a weird element to all of it. But basically, all I'm getting at is that I think a lot of the music that fell under the banner of Prog in the past wasn't necessarily music that's purpose was showcasing technicality or anything like that. And it was more that just existed within that realm of music because it was a world of music inhabited by people who were forward thinking. And one of the elements at the time, I think, the late 60s through the late 70s, like the sort of birth of Prog, I think it was just that these forward-thinking musicians happened to be incredible musicians as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's true.
Yeah, I don't think they set out to say, like, well, let's showcase the upper echelon of technical prowess. I think it was just it ended up being part of their creative process was the fact that they also had access to a much wider palette of musicianship than what you would find in most what you would find, what you could hear in most pop music. Not that those musicians couldn't do it, but what they were interested in wasn't necessarily showcasing anything like that. But I think then sometime in the 80s that Prog ended up just becoming the name for music that, or maybe 90s, that the music that was technical, and
Right.
that became like, well, this is what prog music is. So for me, I think of it being the Deer Hunter being a prog band in the sense of what I think is good for prog music to be, which is that forward thinking and somewhat without boundary, creatively, and
Yeah.
and musicianship kind of ends up going hand in hand with that.
Right. I think you need to be able to play well to some degree to pull off interesting things.
Right, of
Maybe
course.
not, but yeah, no, I agree. I think that nowadays, to me at least, it's evolved the term more into a place for bands that just don't do the norm. That's all.
Yeah,
They aren't going to write a 4-minute pop song for pop radio, and so they become prog. It's almost become that, which is cool. I think it's opened it up and made it more interesting, and I think there's been a growth in popularity as a result.
I would
To
agree.
some degree, I don't know where to start. So let's just go new album because that's what was recent. So, how far in advance of writing these batch of songs and this part of the story and the whole thing was when you were writing Act 1 and 2? Had you seen all the way down the line? Were any of these songs already written at that time, or how far was this going back?
Well, the story was written from Act One, because there's actually there's elements of Act Six in in every record. There's there are foreshadowings of Act Five and Act One, as far as the story is concerned. Um, Musically, I don't really write the way a lot of songwriters have told me they write, where you kind of wake up and you've got to get a song out a day or something like that just to keep the muscle going. I personally end up needing to be I basically need to be in a situation where, okay, now it's time to do this album, and that starts with writing the first song. So really I don't really have songs just waiting around to sort of, I don't want to say shoehorn, but retrofit or
Right.
bring into an act record in that way. I really like setting aside time and making something from the ground up. But the plot of it was written when I wrote Act One.
So when you start working on Act 5 and you start with the Moon Awake, and then are you writing sort of in sequence as, oh, this is where the story is, and this is what the idea musically I have for that part of the story?
Not exactly, but basically what I did, we recorded Act Four and Act Five at the same time and wrote it at the same time as well.
Okay.
And essentially what I did was I prepared a lot of material for the band to dive into. So, like a summation of the story thus far, a sort of treatment on each record of what was happening within the plot and what the characters were, and then sort of some concept art that, nobody, for no other purpose than the band seeing it and wrapping their head around it, and then also some like character bios and things like that. So when and this was really just because I didn't expect everybody who was going to be a part of it to dive into the level of obsession that I have. But if for any reason there was an idea that they had based on that information that would lend itself musically, I wanted to make sure that they had that material available to them. That's usually just up in my head.
Right.
But what the records usually start with is a track listing, and that's me sort of sectioning off each beat of the story per record. So I would just divide it up in the way of, I want to write a song about this, and I want to make sure to highlight this moment and this inner monologue or anything like that, so that I have that prepared. And then it's almost process of elimination. It's not really a linear writing process where, okay, now we're on act 4, let's write it from start to finish. It's more jumping around based on the ideas that I had and in where those would lead. And sometimes that's writing a song for act 5 and then realizing that it in some way is connected to this specific song of act 4, and then sort of using some of that material as to create a motif. It can work that way, or it could be as simple as just, I have this idea for this song and let's just do it, and it happens very naturally.
Right. When you bring some of these different music styles in to the band, Mr. Usher, for example, on this one, do they ever look at you and look at you with like two heads? Like, where'd you come up with this one?
That was a funny one, just because it was one, I think the only song we didn't track when the band was all together. So I got, there were still a few holes left in act 5 that I was working on, and one of them was this song that I wanted to write for this character. And I was talking to my friend Alex, who writes the scripts for the comic books, and I was telling him about the character and how I wanted to write a character song for him, and was trying to nail down the style. And I said I wanted it to be croony and seedy, but also charismatic in a way. And we got on the subject of like Bobby Darin and stuff like that. And I hung up the phone and I grabbed my mom inherited my grandfather's Gibson, I want to say L5, that he played in the Navy band. So it's this nice big band, archtop, beautifully maintained guitar. And I just sat down with it after the conversation with Alex, and I hit record on my voice memo app. And 4 minutes later, I had this song that I just sort of played in real time, and I sent it to him. And when he said, yeah, that would be perfect, that's the right sort of direction, then I had, my brother was visiting, so I had him play drums to it. And the song was sort of this patchwork slowly coming together, where it just started with this acoustic guitar, and then I just had my brother sort of freestyle over it, and I had a bunch of different takes. Then I wrote a brass section to his drums and not the other way around. And so that song was just stemming from not wanting to take a big left turn or have a sore thumb song or anything like that. But it was just, this is exactly what this song should be to sort of convey this character. And I think everyone in the band has come to expect that we're always going to try and adopt, new methods and new palettes of sound, and also new styles that we all love, because we're all just fans of all kinds of music. There's no way to limit that to one thing or the other.
No, I think that it's what makes the album great. And even if it's not someone's favorite song or style that they like or think that the band might do, to me, that reminds me of bands like Queen, and the Beatles back, and all that kind of stuff, that for no apparent reason they would do, a sitar song on Sgt. Pepper. And right. I don't even like that song, but it's great because it's in the scope of that album. It works,
yeah, exactly.
It sets it apart.
I definitely agree with the way that it offers itself to the scope of the record, whether or not it's a song you enjoy. And I think that is a bit of the goal with those songs once they're on the record, is that while not purposefully left of center for the band, it does do a good job of stretching those boundaries. And it's almost like asking some suspension of sonic disbelief of the listener, yeah, where you just want the listener to not expect something and not be surprised, but just not be expectant and just sort of strap in for the ride, which is what I think my favorite records have that side to it. It is a bit of a journey, and they are they do have this sort of ride nature to them of ups and downs and twists and turns.
One thing I like that bands do, and you do a lot of this too, is revisit themes from earlier songs on later albums, even, and all that kind of stuff. I think it's in the old Haunt. You repeat the chorus later on in just a part in. I think it's the March, right?
Yes.
So, at what point do you decide to do those things? I always wonder about that. Again, you wrote that album together, so maybe that sort of happened a little bit organically. But on occasions where it was from albums that were further apart, how often do you plan for that, or it's a eureka moment? Oh, wait, that part from album 2 could go here, type of thing.
Trying to think of the best way to describe it. It's sort of like I sometimes am aware and sometimes unaware of the point when a motif is created within the music. So a lot of the time, like for instance, there's a melody on Act 1 in the song "The Pip and the Priest" that's played by trumpet. There's just this sort of chromatic walk that ends up showing up all over the place after it. And I did know when I was writing it, like, this is a motif I'd like to use for this character and this scene and this setting. But then at the same time, there's like the synthesizer line in the song "Red Hands" is not a line that I had any particular interest in as a motif. But then I find as time goes on, that's the one that I want to call back to in certain songs. And it's not just, oh, this would be cool here or this fits here. But I end up having this mental library of all of the themes and what their significance is and how they can be used and what they should or shouldn't be used for. And then when it's a moment that I find is important to sort of seat in further to the world building of these records, then it's just sort of a matter of being a librarian in my own
Right.
sort of mental library of these melodies. Because at the same time, I could really retrofit any number of them into any one spot. So any of the songs where you hear a callback or a motif, it could have been any number of other callbacks. It's never just, oh, this is cool here, because that criteria sort of does a disservice to the joy of making concept records to me, which is the obsession side of it and the world building side of it. But it's the choice to implement them is always a purposeful one, but the creation of them sometimes is serendipitous or accidental.
The song that I'm stuck on right now that I keep listening to is "Life and Death."
Oh, awesome!
From Act 3, just because it's brilliant. And
thank you. It's a classic rock kind of ballad.
That song almost seems like a real defined ending point, I think. And then you took a break, so and went on to do Migrant and some other stuff. Why the break at that time, and any significance to that song being the last one on Act 3 before you took a break?
Well, I think there's a few elements to that. At the time that we had sort of wrapped up promoting Act 3, I was very burnt out on that concept in the sense of, especially the production of Act 3 was so involved, and so it took so long to make that record, and everything down to the artwork of the record, and obsessing with every detail to the extent that I did, which I do on every record. But I was over the concept at that point in my life. I just wasn't inspired to go back in and do Act 4. It was really just sort of coincidental that in the story there's also this big gap, and the gaps almost match up perfectly from this character from between Act 3 and Act 4, and the decision to make Act 4 after Act 3. But I just wanted something. I knew that the ACT records needed to have this specific sound to them and required that specific sort of workflow. And so I just wanted something that would be rewarding in the sense of being new and refreshing. And that's why I decided to go off and do the color spectrum at that point.
Right. So then what prompted you to start writing Act 4 when you did? And did at that time when you did it, was it like refreshing to go back?
Oh yeah. Well, what ended up happening was I was doing Migrant, and I finished up Migrant, and there's a story in there just about that was the closest I had ever come to the standard submit your songs to the label, and the track listing is a decision that's had by all instead of the band. And it wasn't what I wanted to do with Migrant, but it ended up happening because the version of Migrant that I turned in, everybody except for me, everybody except for the band, really didn't like. It was not the kind of record that the label or management booking thought that they were getting. So I was sort of really depressed after I made Migrant, and I was getting really close to. I basically just accepted this. I'm trying to think. The option was brought up to me of like making a record and attempting to do it targeted at radio, and that they would bump up my contract to work with a big name producer, and I would submit all of my demos first, and then we would choose which of the demos were recorded, and really just doing the systematic pop approach to making an album. And I got a good deal of songs in, and I met with the producer, who was an incredibly good dude and really talented. And then I started to just hate myself and really was there was a piece of it that became a huge theme of Act 5, actually, which was, and I guess of Act 4 and Act 5, but I felt like I was doing this enormous disservice to the younger me, the guy who was so disinterested in all of that and had no real ambition of radio success or financial success. And I started to just sort of feel like fractured. I felt like how could, after everything that I put myself through to play the kind of music that I wanted to play, why in the world would I be doing this to myself now? Where just completely throwing my hands up in the air and saying, like, let's just make money. And so I called my manager and I told him that, and I just said, I'm really ashamed of myself for doing this. And that's not to say that I wouldn't ever do a pop record. It's just not what the Deer Hunter is supposed to be.
Right.
And he asked me, well, what would you like to do? And it was in that instant that I said, what I'd really love to do is I would love to go and do Act 4 and Act 5 at the same time, and I don't want anyone to hear any of it until it's done. I don't want to do the sort of label game. And he said, okay, well, let me talk to the label. And their response was, yeah, sure, that's fine, but basically you have to do both of those records for what you have financially contracted for one record. So I had to basically do both of those albums for the cost of one album. Not including borrowing a good deal of money from both my parents and a friend who ended up paying for the orchestra in full.
Wow.
Extremely lucky. But it was that moment where it was just like, this can't be what your next step is. And as soon as I made that decision, it was like all of the depression that I was feeling and all of the existential crisis that I felt I was in was lifted just instantaneously. And that feeling like cascaded to some very extreme inspiration, to the point where making the records was not, it was laborious, but it was not tedious or anything other than extremely inspired and fun and just exciting to get back into that realm of music in general.
I want to ask you about just Waves,
Yeah.
because that's a really strong, powerful pop record. You know,
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
it sort of was like a hit for you guys, I think.
In a
If
way, I
you
mean,
know,
as much as we could have one, I think
right.
it was for sure.
I mean, that's sort of counterintuitive to what the label's asking you to do when you decide I don't want to do that, and then you write this song, which by any
Yeah.
measure is as poppy as anything that could have been on the radio in a good way.
Oh yeah. No, 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 absolutely. And I had a similar thing happen with it when we were doing Migrant, and my sort of mission statement for the record was that I just really wanted to do a very low key, mid tempo, never singing very loud kind of album. And I wrote Whisper was, I think, one of the first or second songs I wrote for it, and it's one of the most heavy, simple, straightforward songs that I had ever written. But I think it's hard to say, but I think it's just maybe the thing that excuses them for me is the purpose that for which they're written. Um, and if that is what comes out, then that's really wonderful. But I mean, it's strange because I do think I'm enough of an idealist when it comes to music, or I'm stubborn enough that if I was presented two options, which is, one, writing the exact same song for the purpose of getting it on radio, or writing that song within the sort of confines of something a little bit more conceptual and creative, I would favor the conceptual and creative, even though the outcome is the exact same.
Sure.
And I think that's kind of what happened with that. And also sometimes you're faced with recognizing that it's like, well, this is poppy and this is radio. Should I not put this on, or should I dress it up differently so it's not so accessible? And then you're kind of doing you're kind of doing the same thing then anyways. You're taking into account how something will be perceived and letting that shape it, instead of just shaping it naturally and letting it be whatever it actually is. And I think that was something that I've always felt, but I needed to sort of remind myself with songs like that, or King of Swords, or I'm trying to think of the other one, but songs that really on face value are obviously, seemingly, radio songs that fit the sort of the formula in some way.
Right. King of Swords is totally in line like that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Well, I've kept you on quite a bit, man. You know what? I just have one last question. I'm wondering, is there in the Act records mostly, is there a song that is a sort of a favorite for you, or one that maybe defines that collection for you, where you say that's what this is about?
That's tough because I do fall out of love with my records as soon as they're released. Like I get really self-conscious, and I just don't have an interest in them anymore. But for me, and maybe this is because it's so recent, but I think the song "The Moon" in "Awake" does encapsulate what this story ends up being about. And for me, what it ends up being about is just the sort of the cascading nature of decisions, and the way something that you feel like is small and in the moment can have that butterfly effect over time, and eventually the need to course correct, or necessity to course correct when you feel that you've sort of veered too far off of your path. And that's really what this song is about, is this character. And it was also for me, symbolic of that experience I was having, just going from Migrant and eventually ending up at Act 4 and Act 5. But it is about sort of the necessity for introspection and some understanding of your life beyond your wants and your needs, and the way that it impacts others. And I don't know, there's all of those elements exist in that song, and it's my favorite off of Act 5. It's my favorite to play, and I think maybe that offers up a bias, but I do feel like it does a good job of encapsulating what the story is about in general.
Well, I feel vindicated because that was my favorite on the album as well, and we had it on a best of list that we did for the year on the website. But yeah, I mean, it's just fantastic stuff, man. I could geek out on different things on the album. The reprising of that song in the beginning on the last song is like one of my favorite moments of the year. And,
thank you. That's I will be completely honest. That song, when I was done, when I had my final sort of draft of it and ready to be sent off to Mike Watts to mix, that was the song that sort of really got me, in the sense of sort of understanding the finality of what it represented, but also that song I labored over for months.
Are you talking about the last one, the beginning?
Yeah. I really did labor over it, and it went through so many different versions, and I had so many different options of what it could be. And when I finally nailed down what I wanted it to be, I remember taking my phone into our living room and playing it through the speakers to show my girlfriend, and just sort of like this big full body exhale, but also this feeling of like sometimes thinking, am I going so far? Is anyone really going to care? And well, does it matter if they do or if they don't? It left me, having finished the album, that song specifically left me in the strangest headspace. So yeah,
I can only tell you my feeling in listening to that, having experience with big records and prog and listening to all this stuff, where bands have the tendency, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I like it just as much, but the tendency is, this is the last song, we're going to throw all the instruments and the big solos, and what I mean? The sort of, this is the ending, and which maybe if you did, I would have been just as well, but I thought the way this one did it and wrapped it all up, it just was so emotionally intense and awesome. Yeah. I thought it was such a cool way to go, and it was brilliant.
Thank you very, very much.
Anyway, that is all I got, man. I wish you the best. I can't wait for the next album, and I definitely hope to speak to you again soon, at some point.
Yeah, definitely, man. Thank you very much for calling.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Yep, take care.
Bye. Thanks to Casey for the interview. We're going to close with the track off their last album, Act 5. This is the single, Gloria. For upcoming news and interviews, please check theprogreport.com, follow us on Facebook, at The Prog Report on Twitter, or download the podcast on iTunes. Thanks.
Led me to here, looking for an avenue to simply appear. One too many steps into the wrong direction, leading me to throw up my hands. Soon I'll know exactly where I stand, found in a flood of incendiary plans. Oh, I've been falling fast into the rhythms without rhymes. I won't be giving up again. Yeah, I'll be getting up again. I heard a voice, it said, Gloria. Bring me your heart and then you will awaken a state of surprising euphoria. But don't tell anyone. Too many up again. I won't be giving up again. I heard a voice, it said, Gloria, Gloria. Bring me your heart and then you will awaken a state of surprising euphoria. When thoughts how heavy now I've never heard that sound before. I am nothing but an infant wave, stuck in a savage ocean. Soon I'll know exactly where I stand, found in a flood of incendiary plans. Oh, I've been falling fast into the space between the lines, but I'll be getting up again. I won't be giving up again.